Great, so today I want to make a video updating everyone as usual, as well as get into some other important things. Now, getting right into it, Canada is up to 57,244 cases, 3,607 dead, 5,766 cases in Alberta, 95 dead. We had 96 new cases yesterday, 2,713 recovered. So again, we had roughly as many people recover yesterday as we did actually that are newly infected. We continue to test a good 4 or 5,000 people a day. We're already up to 161,245 tested, which is pretty good for a city, or it's not a city, a province of about what, 4.5 million people. We've been under 100 cases for two days now. If this trend continues, I mean, it's not going to happen, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't pretty much completely reopen. Now, people say, oh, you old people are going to die. You want people to die. No, you continue to keep old folks' homes quarantined. You continue to allow more unhealthy people, more, older people that aren't, in old folks' homes, but, living on their own, allow them and to continue to quarantine and let the rest of us go on with our lives because that's the vast majority of people, and the way we're going right now isn't maintainable. And the problem that the we need to keep things closed down or we're all going to die crowd doesn't understand is that they seem to think that we can maintain the way things are going right now, and we really can't. And the only real reasons you need to show that is just basic math, basic understanding of economics. In that the government, the deficit is up to almost $300 billion now. That's a lot of money. That's a ton of money. And again, the more the deficit goes up, the more prices rise, which means, the more inflation happens. Now, the problem with that is that it generally doesn't happen very soon. Usually when the government vastly increases the money supply, there's a small period of deflation because the demand for money goes up, and then there's mass inflation at some point. And the problem, like I keep mentioning, but people don't seem to want to understand, is that inflation hurts the poor the most. And for the simple reason that if you're poor and there's a 10-20% increase in prices of goods and services, you're probably not going to be able to afford that. If you're someone who's rich or even middle class, it's probably up in the air. You can probably just cut back a little bit. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you already barely have any money to work with. So people who support this kind of stuff, you're by default hurting poor people, and you're helping the rich too. Because the rich, they don't care about inflation. They got plenty of money. So and they're the same kind of people that claim to like helping the poor so much, even though their policy positions hurt the poor, which is why I never take them seriously and why you shouldn't either. So that's kind of the thing I wanted to bring up there. Like I said, the other thing to bring up too is that part of the reason why things are going the way they are, and there's a bit of a political divide going on right now, in that you have the largely middle class that wants to get back to work. And, why is that? Well, the rich don't really care because, like I say, they have plenty of money. They don't got anything to worry about, even if the economy stays closed down for a year or two. The middle class are the people that are going to be hurt the hardest. Now, the middle class tend to be more right-leaning voters. And I say tend because it's not like it's 90-95%. It's probably a fairly slight majority. But again, slight majorities when you're looking at 10 million people, 20 million people, that's a big difference. So that's something to point out too. The poor, a lot of people on lower end income, you look at that article I brought up, I think it was yesterday or the day before, a lot of people are getting as much or more money to not work than to work. So again, why would you want to go back to work if you're getting paid as much or more not to work? It's a good point. And the problem is that, like I said, the people being hurt the most are the people who are the ones who are, they're, like I say, they're middle class. They tend to be right-leaning voters, which what do you see happening? You have the more lefty politicians, and the lefty voters especially are the ones that want to keep things closed down. and you have the more middle class, right leaning people who tend to be small to medium sized business owners. You know, they're the kind of people that are being hurt the most, and they're the kind of people that want things to be reopened. And I think part of the other reason too is the left leaning people tend to be people more likely to watch the mainstream media, which is completely blowing this whole situation out of proportion, um, which is probably goes back a little bit to their beliefs of we need to keep things closed down or we're all going to die. Um, so let's get some other stories here. This is from CBS News. It's titled "Turkey Claims Success Treating the Virus with Broad Use of Drug Touted by Trump." And they're referring to the hydroxychloroquine. And this is something that, like I said, you've seen conflicting reports on, but this is something that should be tried more. I've heard several doctors say that yeah, they've used it on their patients, and within a day they're perfectly fine. So again, this is something that should be looked into more and continue to be looked into. But the problem is because Trump was one of the first people to tout it. Now again, Trump was citing I believe, a French study. It wasn't Trump who just pulled it out of his butt and said, "Yeah, this is a good drug." He was citing another study or a study by, I believe, like I say, I believe it was the French, but don't quote me on it. And because Trump does it, you have these people on the left who have this, oh, if Trump does it, we need to automatically take the opposite position. I mean, like you see with Jason Kenney too. Like look at like I pointed out with Bill 10. Bill 10 is the worst thing that the UCP and Jason Kenney did by far. But you don't see the left calling it out for that. They only care about it when they perceive it to only benefit the right, which is why um, all the leftists in Alberta ever complain about is the healthcare cuts, which is actually largely overblown, the public school cuts, which is again largely overblown, and complaining about giving oil, helping out the oil and gas sector, basically. And again, the only reason they care is because helping out the oil and gas sector just benefits the right, which again, they can't have that because again, if the oil and gas sector succeeds, that's less political power for them. Again, all they care about is political power. They don't care about morals and ethics and doing the right thing. If you actually cared, they criticize how bailing out, if you want to call it bailing out again, if the oil industry wouldn't have been crippled by so much regulation, I would argue that they wouldn't need to be bailed out. But even if you want to call it a bailout, you can't turn around and defend the CBC. Like the CBC gets like $1 billion a year in taxpayer money. You can't turn around and criticize that and think that help bailing out the oil industry is a terrible thing, but bailing out the CBC isn't, or is a good thing. Like it's a completely contradictory idea. So again, just wanted to point that out. This is from Reuters, and it's titled "Denmark Says Virus Spread Is Not Accelerated Since Reopening Began." Denmark, the first country outside of Asia to ease its lockdown, said on Thursday the spread of the virus has not accelerated since the gradual loosening of restrictions began in mid-April. Again, this has been going on for about 3 weeks now too. So the incubation period is long past, not long past, but past. So if reopening is going to cause this massive, amount of reinfection, then it should have happened already. It should have happened already, but it hasn't. And again, there's literally no evidence to support keeping things locked down at this point. Hindsight's 2020. We probably shouldn't have even locked down in the first place. So anybody still supporting at this point, again, you have no credibility and no critical thinking skills whatsoever because there's no evidence to support the lockdowns working, none whatsoever. If it did, then why isn't Sweden the highest infected country in Europe, which they're about average, I believe. There's other countries that have a higher infection rate, have a higher death rate, all that kind of stuff. Why isn't Denmark had mass outbreaks again? So again, this whole we need to be so cautious, it's such a stupid idea. Like we should be pretty much completely reopened right now. There's no reason to do this whole BS, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's stupid. It's stupid. We're just crippling our economy. And again, when we get out of this and the government stops paying people not to work, which they might never do, they might just bring in a de facto UBI, which wouldn't surprise me, especially in Canada. Um, but when we get out of this and the economy is the worst economy in our lifetimes, and not just my lifetimes, and pretty much everybody alive's, in fact, I would bet pretty much everybody alive's lifetimes, we're going to be begging and wishing that we wouldn't have done this kind of stuff. And I'm trying to warn people, but again, people just don't want to listen. So I wanted to talk about a couple different things here. Um, so this guy poses the question, what can the Conservative Party of Canada do to reverse the Liberal Party of Canada's gun grab? And Frank Vaughan replies, actually become conservative, show some leadership, stop kicking people out with good ideas, and spend more time arguing over what matters and less about transgender rights for a start. Now, again, this is a very important thing because, like I keep pointing out, the Conservatives in Canada are terrible opposition. Like, well, part of the reason that they lost is number one, immigration. Canada has massive amounts of immigration. Again, immigrants overwhelmingly vote for the left, which is why they want immigration. They don't care about anything else. Um, and again, the other thing too is that the conservatives around they move to the left in hopes to gain moderates, and the problem is that moderates tend to view it as a badge of honor that, oh, I don't vote for either side. I'm not a conservative or a liberal. I'm in the middle, and I'm not going to vote for anyone, no matter what. If you're actually a moderate, you would have voted conservative last election, but you did. Most people probably didn't because they probably would have won if they did. But that's the thing. The problem is one of the biggest problems in Canada is there's no legitimate opposition, like none whatsoever. The NDP, the Bloc, the Greens are all pretty much completely on board with them. They're not actual opposition. They barely disagree on anything. Um, and the Conservatives don't either. The Conservatives have moved so far to the left that most of the principled Conservatives, not most, but enough, stop voting for them that they're never going to get elected again. And the problem is that immigration's so high that even if all the traditional Conservatives did vote for them, they still probably wouldn't win. So that's the big problem with Canada too. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that for all the idiot leftists who constantly accuse, especially in Canada, the conservatives or anyone who votes conservatives of being far right, again, you have literally no idea what you're talking about whatsoever. Like, you couldn't be any more clueless if you tried. And for the simple reason that the conservatives moved left on almost every major issue. Almost every major issue. And again, I challenge you, find me an issue that they moved to the right on. They don't want to lower immigration. They don't want to get rid of any of the gay rights or any of that kind of stuff. And again, you can claim they do, but again, show me a official policy position that they've said that. They don't want to go after abortion. Like, what do they want to go after that the liberals traditionally complained about? The reason why you think they're far right is because the liberals and the NDP and the Greens are all de facto socialists. And the reason for that is that socialists is pretty far left, the conservatives are in the middle, and they just appear to be way out there because the liberals have gone so far to the left. It's not they've gone so far to the right. That's just your excuse. So that's the thing I wanted to point out too. Find people on like, look at, I mean, this guy, Frank Vaughan, perfectly good example. 99% of people you see this. Look for people who used to vote conservative. Ask them why they're not voting conservative. 99% of them will tell you that the reason they're not voting is the conservatives have gone too far to the left. I've literally not heard of one person who is a traditional conservative voter or traditional conservative who says they no longer like the conservatives because they moved too far to the right. Not one. And I know a lot of people who no longer support the left because they've gone too far to the left. I don't know anybody who doesn't vote left, who used to vote left because they're not far enough to the left. That those things don't exist. Those things don't exist. Um, so the last thing I wanted to talk about here is from the Buffalo Chronicle. Now, again, these are allegations, but I just wanted to point it out because much crazier things have happened, and there's clearly something going on. But anyway, Sophie Trudeau's cousin alleges a wide-ranging Liberal Party cover-up to protect pedophile officials. Now, a lot of these, I mean, look at Jeffrey Epstein too. Like, look at the people he was connected to. The amount of fame, celebrities, politicians, the royal family was involved. I guarantee you, there's people high up in the Liberal Party, close knit officials that are pedophiles. I guarantee it. It's just a matter of, is it one in like 100? Is it very rare, or is it relatively, maybe is it like 10-20%? My guess is it's actually a lot more likely than you would think, just based off the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, just the amount of people connected to him. So again, this is something I wanted to point out. Again, they're obviously allegations, but the one thing I do know is if something like this was going on, the liberals would be doing whatever it took to cover it up, like whatever it took. So it's again something I wanted to point out. And again, the Liberal Party is clearly compromised in some way, like clearly compromised. Again, I've talked about this before. The stuff, some of the things that they're going on. Again, they they like just the whole World Health Organization stuff, the stuff with China again. They're so clearly either full on commie sympathizers or they're compromised in such a way that China and the World Health Organization are threatening them, hey, play ball with us or we're gonna release your dirt. My guess is just a little bit of both. You have a lot of people on the left who are communists who they like to pretend they're not, even though they support every commie policy under the book. And then you have some people who are more, I wouldn't call them moderate, but just not commies. Um, but they like the power that comes with being a politician. They like the money. They like the expensive dinners. They like being on TV, all this kind of stuff. And the way that they got to their power was to do some dirty stuff and do some, backhanded, under the book, like I say, like high level politicians rarely get a lot of power and a lot of fame and get high up in politics by doing the right thing and telling the truth. That very, very rarely happens. Like very rarely. So again, these kind of things, like I say, allegations, but at least worth noting. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got a link in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. Last couple things, as always, check out my BitChute channel and check out my my Twitter as well.